Hi, I am Maria Dawson, and this is a presentation of my action research. This action research is all about the impact that COVID has had on all students' achievement and how can we fix this as educators. The research question that was the main focus of my action research is how can I utilize Everfi to be able to increase my students' desire to continue learning and to make sure that all students are growing and succeeding as they fully understand and master the content. So let's begin. As a high school teacher myself, I noticed some of my students were lacking a lot of basic information when it came to certain lessons. I started thinking, what if that was related to the pandemic? I then started researching online for different articles related to the COVID pandemic and the students' learning gap that I was noticing. At the same time, I decided to talk to some of my coworkers to see if they were noticing the same things, and we all agreed. There was an article written by Jay Hoffman and E. Secord in 2021 called The Effect of COVID 19 on Education. This showed educational losses at many levels and verified the increased anxiety and depressions associated with these changes. The problem is that there is no long term data yet, as it just recent. This is the main reason why I dedicated my action research project to see how students' achievement has been affected by COVID and what teachers can do to fix this. Due to COVID, a lot of students missed that face to face instruction and had to do virtual school, but not everybody can learn through an online interface. I teach personal finance and child development, grades 9 through 12. Having said this, I have noticed a difference in my students now that we're going back to normal. Some students are now presenting mental disorders like depression and anxiety. They seem so careless and disconnected. I have the impression that a lot of these is a lack of interest due to a lack of responsibility and ownership they had while we were teaching and learning virtually due to the pandemic. As educators, we have to try different ways to bring those interests back into our classrooms and keep our students engaged at all times by enhancing our lessons to be able to meet their needs and interests. In my personal finance class, for example, I need my students to at least know simple math, as we do a lot of work on creating budgets and managing a record of all of our transactions between other things. They also need to know key concept of financing and banking, but unfortunately this is just not there. So I decided to enhance my lesson by implementing the EverFi program about financial literacy. This has made a very big difference in my students and the way they understand the content of the lesson. This program is a digital tool that allows for a blended learning environment to be successful no matter what grade you are or what learning style you possess. It allows the students to improve their academic ability, student engagement, communication, and teacher impact. Due to the fact that some of my students are showing signs of frustration and anxiety due to the lack of basic information they have, I use quantitative data to measure the differences in my students' performance and whether they grow academically or whether I, as an educator, have to do something different. I also utilize the qualitative method as I surveyed my students, their parents, and other coworkers in order for me to get feedback about the program. I also use a new analytic tool from Canvas to compare each individual progress and the report that the Everfi program provides with the students' weaknesses and strengths for each lesson. In order to validate my action research and to make it reliable, I decided to do some literature reviews of this subject. There was an article written in 2020 by several authors that explained how they conducted a field experiment study to analyze the effect of COVID confinement on the learning performance of students in higher education. They utilized around 450 random students from three different content areas, all from high schools. This was in Spain. They divided the students into two groups to be able to study the difference in assessments. The first group was from 2017 to 2018 and 2018 to 2019 year. The second group included 2019 to 2020, which is when COVID hit. The authors concluded that there is a significant positive effect of COVID 19 on students' performance and that students were not studying or continuous in a continuous basis, as well as demonstrated that they are changing learning and teaching strategies that can be directly related to COVID 19 as well. I also found another article written in 2020 that conducted research in which they studied the time in schools anticipating the consequences of having their learning interrupted. They were able to read and interpret data, and students here on reading math and science test results of 15-year-old students in countries all over the world and then compare them to those students here in the United States around the same age. They found that students do tend to learn better when they are in schools, and that students that are absent often do struggle more. The author of the article states that the pandemic has exacerbated opportunity gaps associated with uneven access to food and nutrition, shelter, health insurance, and financial relief measures, which can also cause a learning gap in students. Last but not least, I found another study from 2020 in which around 1,500 higher education students were surveyed in order to understand the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on their education. The results showed a large negative impact on students due to the pandemic. For example, 13% of students delayed graduation, and around 14% lost either their job, a job opportunity, or an internship. He was also able to demonstrate how a quarter of students decreased their study time, as well as a quarter of students actually increased it. The author of the study stated as well that the disruptive effects of the COVID-19 outbreak have impacted almost all sections of our society. Higher education is no exception. A research methodology gives research legitimacy and provides scientifically sound findings, as well as a detailed plan that helps to keep researchers on track, making the process smooth, effective, and manageable. It also allows the reader to understand the approach and methods used to reach this conclusion. This research, for example, explains the impact that COVID had on students' learning and how digital tools like Everify can actually help fill in some of those gaps. I used a mixed methodology, both quantitative and qualitative. I used a qualitative method as I interviewed coworkers, students, and parents in order for me to see if the program was successful in achieving this purpose. I also conducted several observations and gathered my anecdotal notes. I utilized the pretest and I administered to my students and showed the students the score less than 80% to be part of my research. I then provided them with the access to the digital tool. I utilized a quantitative method when I analyzed the data from the pretest and compared it to those of the post-test. I also utilized a progress report that the digital tool generates, as well as the new analytics from Canvas, and compared it to other students with the same levels of understanding. These are the results of the pretest that I administered to my students. And right next to it are the questions that I utilized in this survey I sent to parents and coworkers. These are the results of the survey that I had my students complete after they were able to participate in the EverFi program. I utilized experimental research with an explanatory design as I attempted to establish a cause and effect relationship between COVID, learning gaps, and EverFi financial lessons. I also administer a case study as I focus on a particular research problem. This allowed me to test my theory of how a digital tool can help fill the learning gaps some students have. I utilized a quasi experimental design as I did establish cause and effect between two variables. Around 55 students were provided a pretest with around 30 questions. The post test was all about the content of the pretest actually was all about the content of personal finance lessons. Besides this pretest, I also surveyed several coworkers, parents, and students themselves, looking for a better understanding of whether these learning gaps existed or not. After agreeing that there is a gap, I decided to work specifically on those students that scored 80% or less on that pretest. So I gave them access to the EverFi Financial Lesson Program. This program is all about teaching and reinforcing students how to make the right and smart decision when it comes to their financial well-being over their lifetime. It is also very interactive and hands-on and allows the teacher to enhance the lessons and meet the students' needs and interests as they progress and achieve full mastery of the content. This program includes lessons like taxes, relevant financial education, objectives, problem solving, and self reflection through games and real scenario situations that allow all students to make connections with the content of the lesson. After the students finish their program and finish the post test, we focus a drastic change in students who utilize the digital tool, including ELL students and students with disability. There was a total of 79% of students increase. After all of these, we gave the students, parents, and other teachers the opportunity to give us feedback about the program. The EverFi program ended up being very beneficial for our classes and our students. Because of this, we decided to implement this program in other classes and to include every student as student demonstrated a huge interest in it and they claimed to be a fun and engaging way of learning new things. As our research was of an exploratory nature, it allows also several opportunities for future research. Given the thorough sampling strategy focused on exploring the progress of my personal finance students who scored 80% or less on their pretest, our study could very well be extended in search of statistical rather than analytical, as we did in this case. Our research also offers the opportunity to validate and refine the concepts that came up from our analysis. For example, the idea of prior knowledge and personal connectedness with the lesson will need further elaboration, as well as extra accommodations for ELL students and students with disabilities. Some of the hypothesis questions that we came up with um, when we were looking at the pretest in detail and per lessons are, for example, when looking at the pretest in detail and per lesson, what lesson is the one with the highest percentage of passing rate and fully understanding? Which one is the lowest one? Is there a correlation between the two lessons, such as financial performance? Is there a big difference on how each lesson is taught and understood by the students in the classroom? This study can also be extended in a comparative way. We could compare two or more classrooms working on the same lesson, but only one of them using the EverFi program. Further studies can definitely provide precious information in order to possibly add this program to other classes while we meet all of the students' needs and interests and help them achieve their fullest potential. Our main focus was on how to fill in the learning gap by utilizing programs like EverFi And in congruence with the previous research findings, we found out that most students who participated in the program were able to achieve a level of mastery of the lesson content.